Hi, I'm Ben Pierce from the Roadster Tracker, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the SLS program. Now, in the last few days, we've had some really interesting news. SLS is the very large rocket that NASA has been building for a long time. To some extent, they've been building this for the last 20-25 years, although it's changed a little bit in exactly what they were going to do, and it's changed in the scope somewhat. The general idea has been to take shuttle-based hardware and make it work with a single-shot rocket that could carry a huge amount of payload. See, a space shuttle could carry an enormous amount of payload to orbit, but most of that orbit was the spacecraft. If they could have sent an entire payload instead of the space shuttle, then they could have taken a considerably more amount of cargo into orbit. Would have been pretty neat, and that's basically the idea behind SLS. But it's been in trouble, even though it seems really easy to take this existing rocket, the space shuttle, to take the engines that are already there, to take the tanks that are there, the solid boosters that are there, just stretch them a little bit and do some things. It's taken a considerable amount of time and money to be able to do what little they have. And the SLS is a very unique rocket. It's the most powerful rocket that has been on the books since the Apollo program. The SpaceX BFR, or now Starship and Super Heavy, will be able to carry more, and the New Glenn approaches the carrying capacity of the SLS program, but it's not quite there. But this program has been continually behind, and it's expected that a single launch is going to cost between $1 and $1.5 billion. Another part of this program is the Orion Capsule. That is a capsule that's used specifically to get into deep space. It's very much like the Apollo capsule that had a service module on the behind part and a re-entry module that were connected together, and they could share the various services, and they would ditch the service module as they re-enter Earth. This is supposed to undergo an unmanned test in about 15 months in June of 2020. And there's a lot of grumblings because SLS is not looking like it's going to be ready by then. So they're trying to figure out what else they could do. There is no rocket that has the ability to lift the entire SLS and send it directly on the course to the moon. That just doesn't exist. But there are a couple that are close. The Falcon Heavy, which had its debut launch a year ago, could carry this entire thing to a geostationary transfer orbit, which isn't quite as far as the moon, but it is pretty close. And there are some rumblings that maybe if you took the fairing off, and if you took the upper stage and stretched it a little bit, then it might even be able to make it almost all the way to the moon. And if it did, this would be great. It would be a lifesaver to this program, allowing them to test it even earlier. Of course, it could also show that the SLS program isn't needed at all, but that's another issue. More likely, though, is a Delta Heavy would launch carrying one of its upper stages as its payload, and that upper stage would be fully fueled, and that would somehow dock with the Orion Capsule that had been launched by another provider, probably the Falcon Heavy. So these two rockets would be launching almost at the same time within a couple of hours of each other from the same area of Florida. Dock in space and then send this NASA probe out into the deep part of the solar system back to the moon. And this thing will orbit around the moon for a couple of weeks and then come back home, and it's a good test of the system, which they're hoping to do a manned version of in the short-term future. This could work, and if it did, it would be a really interesting thing. People have been saying for some time that the commercial industry is quickly approaching the SLS program, and this would really be a demonstration. There have been a couple of other things. The Europa-Clipper mission is a mission to send a payload to Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, that has some really interesting features, and this will be able to map out the entire thing and possibly even send a lander to the surface. Europa-Clipper has a payload of about 6 metric tons. Now, Falcon Heavy could not send this directly to Jupiter. It has the ability to send something to Jupiter, but not something that heavy. But it could send something on a path to Jupiter that does a flyby of Earth, similar to what Juno did. And from there, it would be able to launch towards Jupiter and make it just fine. It would take the cruise time from 2.5 years to 5 years, which is something significant. But the cost reduction would be immense. An SLS rocket will cost $1 billion or more. Whereas a Falcon Heavy, in the fully extendable mode and sent as a NASA as a customer, would maybe $200 million. If it works out, it'd be great. Delta IV Heavy could also potentially send something to the same orbit and be able to do something, although it would take a little bit longer for Delta Heavy to do it because it doesn't have quite as much power as the Falcon Heavy, unless you're talking about a C3 of 100, which is, you're talking like Parker Solar Probe or New Horizons, where you're sending something to the outmost parts of the solar system. Anything else than Falcon Heavy is your best bet if you can fit in the fairing. It's really exciting to figure out what's going on, and you know, the SLS rocket does have some really, really neat features. It's the only rocket that has a really large payload fairing that has hardware built for it. And you could do some really neat stuff with that. And it was a really great concept in its day. It's just been slow, and it's kind of stuck to using some of the shuttle technology, which it's being used for reasons that it wasn't fully intended. The shuttle engines were intended to be reused, whereas the SLS engines will be discarded, so it's really kind of expensive and it's a little bit beyond its day. It's a great effort though, and until something like Starship comes along, there still might be a place for it. The SLS program will be able to still do its primary mission, which is to send humans to explore the surface of the moon with its current plan, but it'll have to rely a lot on commercial partners to fulfill some of the smaller pieces of that mission. We'll see what happens, but thank you guys much for joining me. Let me know whatever questions or comments you guys have. And until next time, keep on tracking. Take care.